should be live. We're live.
Mel, nice to see you.
It's lovely to see you, Craig. Craig Forman, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! So, Craig, we always start the show with a jingle. You've been
I'm looking forward to your walk-in music, Mel, even
you've been
via Facebook Live.
you've been in showbiz all these years. So here we go. It's a bit primitive, but
You off your feet, we move,
from the beginning.
get a chair, grab a seat, or we'll sweep you off your feet. We move, we groove, you got Mel. Ease your legs, rest a while, all you gotta do is smile. We're swell, can't you tell, you got Mel. When the show begins, you better hold on real tight, or before you know it, you'll be high as a kite. Take a break, settle down, we're the only show in town. It's our road, don't you know, you got Mel. Give it up, don't think twice, we're a hurricane on ice. What the hell, give a yell, ring your bell, show and tell. Mademoiselle, give a smell, you got Mel.
You've got Mel. And Mel has Craig Forman. Hey, Craig, it's so great to see you.
Mel, it's great to be here. And of course, here in the Bay Area, as you know, I'm in San Francisco. Our former neighbor, he now lives in Southern California, but originally from the Bay Area, Tom Hanks. There are fewer and fewer people, Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan, who remember that reference. But those of us who've been around for a while on the internet, yeah, we've got Mel. Thank God we do.
And thank God I have you. So, Craig, is there anything in media that you haven't done?
Lots of things, but I'll still take it as a compliment.
Okay, so a couple of words about what you're doing these days, and then we'll start out with babyhood.
Good. Okay. Well, so these days I'm an investor and entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. I'm speaking to you from the home studio here in San Francisco, California. I'm the West Coast general partner of Next News Ventures, which is an early stage investor in media technology, telecom businesses that are on the next phase of the still early days, we believe, of everything that's happening with global distributed computing and digital. And it's amazing, Mel, as you know, you've been involved in this as long as I have. It's just such a wonderful thing that even almost 25 years, I guess we could say next year, 25 years, since really the dawn of the consumer internet, maybe slightly longer if you attributed that to that famous email that Jim Clark sent to Mark Andreessen and said, hey, your NCSA Mosaic thing that you're doing at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, that seems pretty interesting. I started a company called Silicon Graphics. Why don't you come out here and see if we can't build a company together? Even though it's 25, getting closer to 3 decades since that moment, and of course there were other moments, it's still very early. And we're seeing it even this week with colossal deals like Salesforce, Slack for almost $30 billion, really a Bay Area, San Francisco deal. So it's still very early days of that. And that's what we're doing at Next News. I also am very involved in trying to work on solutions for credible journalism. I'm a member of the board of the U.S. industry around local news, and as you know, until recently headed the company that's one of the largest local news companies in the U.S., McClatchy, and still very involved in trying to come up with solutions for local news, which is critical for our civic life.
So, are you in touch with my friend Jimmy Wales?
Not recently, but we share a number of friends and a couple of his board members at the Wikimedia Foundation in common, and terrific what he's doing there. I'm not sure if there were more initiatives coming out of that world in local news some time ago than recently. So I'm not sure if that remains a subject of as much interest for him. So if it is, and you want to put us together, I'm happy to do it. But lately, it seems more focused on making Wikipedia as strong as it can be.
Okay, but I mean, Wiki Tribune is his great passion. So I'm not following it because I'm not really in that. I'm in the area of not fake news but fiction, where everything is good as long as it's not the truth.
Well, you have the best fiction, which is fiction for young people, that's really the best fiction, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, so that's wonderful. And I should mention that you're my friend, and Jimmy Wales is my friend, because of a guy named Yossi Vardi, who invented this crazy thing called Kinernet, where we
Well,
met.
well, not only that, but as long as we're on Yossi and we could spend our entire time talking about Yossi stories, um, even your walk-on music, we should actually, pay tribute to the fact that Yossi and his family, the reason why we're able to do things such as this comes from the kernel of insight that this medium was going to be a real-time communications mechanism in real-time synchronous, not asynchronous, just like email. And ICQ and the creation of messaging on the AOL platform, and really that little jingle that wasn't just You Got Mail, but the ICQ acquisition of AOL might have been one of the largest, certainly one of the largest deals of its time. And of course, Yossi and the whole Vardy family really at the core of messaging and all this communications like we're doing now on Facebook and other platforms.
Okay, and then we have other Yossi Vardi friends we have to thank. Alon Cohen, who invented voice over IP, and of course Jeff Pulver, so who made it free. So we have a
Yeah,
lot of we have a big mishpoche, lots of people to thank here.
it's a very big family. Yeah, you mentioned Jeff. I mean, Jeff has been involved in so many things that ultimately became, just colossal. Yeah, real-time voice, the concept of free. I'm trying to remember how Yossi put the anecdote. I forget, but uh, 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 free free as a consumer concept to ensure global gigantic footprint is just an incredibly powerful concept. And of course, as business people, we know ultimately at the end of the day, free is not sustainable if there isn't some sort of revenue model. And in fact, this is
Tell me about it. I'm suffering now. I'm hoping,
but
I'm hoping you'll tell me what to do.
well, I think the reason why I bring it up, and we're laughing, but it's sort of true, it's you can't find smarter people than Yossi and Jeff and all of that. And um, the consumer concept of, well, we got to make it cheaper than free, because if we make it cheaper than free, then everyone will use it, is an incredibly powerful concept. You just want to also be there when at the other side of it, the business model that sustains free to consumers comes together.
The business model that consumes that advertises less than free and makes money. There's a Jewish joke like that, but I told it once on the show and nobody understood it. So
It's hard to tell jokes, don't you find? Zoom is it's a tough forum for jokes.
yeah, it is. It's almost impossible, but it has lots of advantages. So let's stick with the advantages, Craig.
Good, good.
So tell us, like, you are a hugely successful guy. You're an award-winning journalist, and you've run companies, and there's no area of the media that you haven't touched. Where did it all start?
Well,
Tell us about a baby Craig.
we're recording this, right? Because let me get my mom on the phone so she can hear you say that, and that'll be a successful meeting.
It's also asynchronous, so that you could send it to her.
So thank you for saying that. And actually, you have to really take a step back and say, part of the reason why I think so many of us are still as actively involved in figuring out what's next is because there's a genuine energy and excitement about having been involved in this since the very early days, and that'll tie back to the initial story. I've been a dedicated watcher of You've Got Mel, and so I've seen such interesting stories. I'm going to tell mine in a slightly shortened fashion because I'm not so sure mine's is interesting. But while I'm a technology, media, telecom guy, I'm originally a newsman, and I think in many ways, in even my architecture of my professional life, which has been, most of the last 20 years in Silicon Valley, ran a big part of Yahoo when Yahoo was a thing, Yahoo News, finance, sports, health, weather. Those businesses, when I came into them, were already successful. What we did was we made them number one and kept them number one amid an onslaught of subsequent competition from just about every big platform company. I ran a mid-sized US ISP called Earthlink, which was one of the pioneers of clever ISP technology. In fact, Yossi, Jeff, many others involved in a lot of the things in the early days with Earthlink, and a very great entrepreneur, Sky Dayton, who was the founder there, and really one of the great internet CEOs, Gary Betty, who tragically died before his 50th birthday, who really helped put that on the map. And then most recently, McClatchy. All of these businesses had some aspect of the media side of technology, media, telecom. And I grew up, I'm a Manhattanite, born, raised in the New York area, grew up in that part of the country, very much part of who I am and my family from that part of the world. But after university, got very lucky and was the youngest person on the startup staff, my first startup, which was the Wall Street Journal's European edition in the 1980s. And so the condition of my employment was that I could get an economy class ticket on what was then the Belgian national airline, Sabena. People joked that it stood for such a bad experience, never again, which I thought was, a little uncharitable. But it was a nonstop flight from New York to Brussels. And Dow Jones, the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, said, yeah, we'll pay for the flight, but not for any baggage. So you can only take, what you can carry on in the, and what you have as part of your. So it was my first transcontinental, transnational, transoceanic move. And I moved literally with 2 suitcases, and that was it. But, I was very lucky and fortunate to have that job. And I started out in the newsroom, which was an extraordinary newsroom filled with some of the most talented people who've gone on to wonderful things. Just an incredible number of people, led by Norm Pearlstein, who's just finishing up his assignment as the editorial leader of the Los Angeles Times. But Norm had been a huge executive at Time Warner, was the managing editor of the Wall Street Journal, many people around the world, the editor-in-chief and chief content person at Time Inc., in Henry Luce's old office, helped restoring many of those brands. John Huey, who succeeded Norm in that role, John Geddes, who was a deputy managing editor at the New York Times, just a huge talent bench. Marty Schenker, who's the chief content officer at Bloomberg, just a wonderful talent group. And so I learned, I had the great honor, as some of us do sometimes, fortunate in life, to be part of a really successful team and a truly winning team. And I think that helped very much give me a tailwind to the rest of the arc of my career. I think sometimes those very early jobs are critically important to showing you how it's done. And
Craig,
let me just pause
Craig,
there.
you're jumping ahead. I want to go back to 5-year-old Craig. What were you like? You're such a lovely guy, because people who have so many accolades and medals and awards and financial success are usually not as as nice as you are. And I remember after we met, we followed up with something and you helped me, and you're just a very kind individual. What were you like as a 5-year-old? What did your parents teach you about life?
So I grew up in a household with a lot of conversation and a lot of noise. 2 brothers, my older brother and myself. I think it's very nice of you to say that, Mel, but I think, if you go back to what it is in our family life that helps, kind of get us as our 5-year-old self to who we are, it was a household that was very exposed to a lot of the world. My dad had a job where he traveled quite a lot. I think this is something people don't talk a lot about now, but let me bring it up. My dad was an older father. My dad, who passed away some years ago now, was born in 1917 and was part of the generation that's now known as the greatest generation, but that generation never would refer to itself as that. So in typical Forman fashion, he went to university and enlisted in the U.S. Army, because if you enlisted in the U.S. Army prior to Pearl Harbor, there was a period in which when you did your service, you would be out and seeing the storm clouds brewing in Europe and the Imperial Japanese forces in Manchuria. My dad thought, well, I better enlist in the Army because then I'll do my tour and I'll be done when all this is over. So when he finally left the U.S. Army 12 years later, he was in his late 30s. and arrived in New York as a young guy who had an important part of his life in the US Army. He was in the Pacific and an intelligence officer. Photo reconnaissance photography and media was a big part of his life too. But he had a pretty broad world experience. My mother too, who went to college and was a very early career woman, although younger than my dad, they were both very exposed to the world at large. And so I think, if I really tried to answer the question, again, it's super, super nice of you to say that. But, I think in our household, with a lot of conversation and a lot of debate and a lot of, what about this and what about that? And because of that, you had to come armed with, an argument and something coherent. I think that exposure to the world at large definitely was an influence on me.
That's incredible. So let's speed ahead to the present day, and I want to tell you
one more personal story of interest, maybe only to you and me, as long as you said speed ahead.
You can tell us, man. It's your program, man.
Well, since you said speed, so one other thing to recall about my dad. So I was born, I'm the second, so let me get the math right. My dad was 44 when I was born. Again, first marriage for my dad and sole marriage. He and my mom were together for almost more than 50 years. So long marriage. When I was a kid growing up in the New York area, so we're a fast family, high clock speed. A lot of people are like this, very familiar to you. But my mother would take us on the weekend. She would want to go shopping in Manhattan. We were then living in Springsteen country. We moved out to New Jersey when I was a little kid, and I grew up in Monmouth County, New Jersey, which is along the Jersey Shore south of New York City, but more focused on New York City. And when I say Springsteen country, it's the part of the world where Bruce Springsteen's comes from, actually the town over from where I grew up.
You could have had a career as a rock and roller.
Well, I spent most high school nights chasing around trying to see if we could actually get to the Stone Pony in Asbury Park at exactly the moment that Bruce and the band would stand up. It worked out once or twice, but we spent a lot of more weekends trying than making it successful. But anyway, so my dad at that time, it was still the era of, it was pre-oil shock America. And my dad would put us in the back of our Buick Special station wagon, and we would drop my mom off at one of the department stores over, in Midtown or on the East Side. And then we'd spend most of the afternoon trying to run the green lights all the way up the west side of Manhattan to see whether or not my dad could time the car to exactly the sequence of the lights changing. So
I love that. I love that.
I think in those days, although it was breaking the speed limit, if you did it just under 60 miles an hour, which is pretty fast for 10th and 11th Avenue, you could actually go from 42nd Street to basically 96th Street without ever stopping. So that's basically how we occupied those weekends when I was a little kid in New York City, talking in the car and trying to drive the Buick station wagon too fast up the Upper West Side.
That's incredible. There's a stretch here in Tel Aviv that you can time. But I used to do it with the kids.
Does it still work?
Well, there you have to be slow. So the trick there is to be slow enough to catch all the green lights.
That's much safer for pedestrians, but it is less fun.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Craig, the question that's bothering me, that I've been meaning to ask you for months, is there such a thing as objective news? Because here in Israel, we get CNN and Fox News. And Fox News is like Trump's channel, and CNN is like Biden's channel. And, in my old age, I'm trying to figure this out, because it's not only about reporting facts, but it's about reporting which facts you choose to report. Mm-hmm. I'll shut up now because I want to hear what you have to say.
So this is a great question, and also one of the big questions of our time, Mel. But it's also, in some respects, important to remember it's not dramatically new as a question, nor is this time, by any stretch of the imagination, the worst example of opinion or non-objective facts clouding even some of the most successful news brands globally. And I can point back, even just in the United States, and then we can do a tour of the globe and how news has evolved in other places. But even in the United States, there have been periods in the 19th century and even in the 18th century when the concept of an objectively factual press really didn't exist to any great extent, certainly not to the extent that most of us think about when we talk about the demise of objective news. So that's just against that backdrop. Let's break your question down into a couple of different areas. Are there objectively knowable facts? My belief is there are, right? The earth is not flat. A lot of people in human civilization thought it was for a very long period of time. And why wouldn't you? If your perspective is, I'm standing on the seashore in Tel Aviv or any other place in the Mediterranean for that matter, looking out at the horizon, it looks the same and it sure looks flat. And it's only by getting perspective from another breakthrough thinking, Galileo and all of that, or that wonderful picture from astronaut William Anders in the early Apollo program, the picture of the Earthrise from the surface of the moon, that I think in some respects kind of for the first time gave humankind that sense that, yeah, we may be all throwing rocks at each other or all that stuff, but we're kind of on this globe spaceship and we kind of have to work together because like we're all alone, or it sure looks like we're all alone in this black nothingness. And there's another photograph I'm thinking of too. Those kinds of objective facts, they're inarguable, right? I mean, yeah, there are some flat earthers today, just like there are some people who think that all that moon stuff was faked in some Hollywood studio. I do not believe that. Let me state now, and we'll be on Facebook forever. I do not believe that. Okay, so if we start from the presumption that there are those and other objective facts, yes, there is objective news. And we had a really wonderful period where globally, along with some very good things that happened globally, including distributed computing, global communication networks that allow us to have this conversation. And, if we had someone in Seoul, or if we had someone in Tokyo, or if we had someone in Dakar, they could join us right now. Many other things, the green revolution, sustainable agriculture in the developing world, free trade, which allowed, huge economic progress around the globe, many other things. They've resulted in greater global progress with a lot of suffering. And we have to acknowledge that interface between the progress and the suffering is one of the reasons why we're seeing many things today, including populist backlash and all that stuff. For news people, starting with the concept of objectively knowable facts, the question then becomes, in this day and age, you mentioned two brands that are on opposing ends of the spectrum. Are those the sole brands through which we should be getting our news? And are they doing objective, knowable facts in the recounting of that? Or are they also in the marketplace and the reality of the marketplace of our economy of ideas? And I will say, not taking pot shots at either one of them, the realities of the telecommunications marketplace and the disruption of the technology marketplace have been causes of a fight to gain audience, gain attention share, gain controversy, which makes for a better story than the objective recounting of the earth is round and we are maybe not alone in the universe, but it sure looks like it from that picture. And it turns it into from time to time, a circus of recrimination and invective, because it has aspects that are more of entertainment than they are of news. And so I think it's very important to focus on some basic principles. Independent journalism in the public interest is a cornerstone of democratic states. And a healthy news and information economy, I think, is essential to that success. It's one of the reasons why I'm so involved in it. Technology has made it more possible by bringing more voices to the conversation, lowering costs to entry and all that stuff. But just like, Winston Churchill said about democracy, it's the worst system unless you can find something, there's nothing better. I'm messing up the quote. The same thing is going on in the technology, media, and news business. And part of that is the reason why I think we're seeing our feeling that this does not feel like objective news. This feels like more opinion. So let me pause there and see if that gets at the question, because we could take it a bunch of different ways.
It does. But this leads me to the question of money. Okay? People like me who try to do good things end up thwarted because at the end of the day, every time you ask for an investment, people say, well, where's your ROI, your return? And still, people aren't used to the idea of doing good things for the world. In this, and it doesn't matter if it's in books in my case, or in TV or radio. The people who are trying to do the good stuff without making money and offering everything for free are going to be at the bottom of the feeding chain. Or am I mistaken?
I don't think you're mistaken, because I think all of us know that perception, right? And it's real. It's not just a thing you believe. We can talk about example after example of that being the case. But I think the question becomes, because that's real, is that the sole way to look at it? And I'll offer a helpful contrast and counterexample. So I think these get to be deeply personal questions. How do we measure what it is that we're trying to do? How do we measure our positive impact for the time that we're here in these bodies doing what we do? And for me, that is trying to objectively help us get to a better understanding, a better place, because of independent news and information, right? That's a big part of who I am. And it means technology, and it means people, and reporting, and finding stories, and telling in a way that comes home. And people can do it lots of other ways. I'm thinking of a very, very, I think, important counterexample, a guy you may know, Ray Chambers, among many other things, financially astute, wonderful guy, invented the concept of something called the LBO, or leveraged buyout. Accounting background, also from New Jersey, but really a financial genius who the leveraged buyout was a financial structure still used obviously a lot today, where you took the value of an enterprise and you created a financial structure that allowed you to use the value of the enterprise to finance from willing financial sources a purchase of the enterprise to make it better. Sometimes it didn't always make it better, but many times it did. And he partnered with a former Treasury Secretary, Republican Treasury Secretary, William Simon. They formed a firm called Westray, and that was the first LBO firm. And now these firms are gigantic. That one no longer exists, but KKR and many other firms. You could argue that that was a perfect example of your point about, the kind of money centrality of it. But if you fast forward to today, I don't know exactly what Ray's title is, but I think Ray is a ambassador plenipotentiary at the United Nations. Ray has become one of the world's most influential leaders in interdiction of malaria, along with the Gates Foundation, working with the WHO. His, kind of contributions to global health, both from science and bringing, important people. And he probably won't like me saying this in this forum, because he's a very quiet person. But, you sort of say, that's kind of the barbell example, I think, that illustrates exactly what you're saying, which is, I think it depends on how you define things. And he would be a great person for you to have on the show to talk about this. But, he's a guy who's thought deeply about this. And he sort of invented this financial structure, which unleashed all of this creative construction, destruction of the global financial system and capitalist enterprise right out of the book of Schumpeter and the great economists of the 20th century. And he's been a key leader in the interdiction of one of the most, harmful human maladies that can be controlled, which is, mosquito spread malaria. And same guy.
Yeah, but okay, so it's like the CNN and Fox News all over again. I'm looking for the middle ground. And if I'm going to confess on my show, I suffer from the same thing. You know, I love interviewing people. I love it. And I love that it's free and nobody tells me who to interview and what questions to ask, right? But and lucky for me, I don't need a job financially. But you know, afterwards, sometimes they say, you know, you're a schmuck. You have this website with $150,000. You don't charge anybody, and then you interview people. You don't charge them. You're a schmuck. And so this is it's a psychological thing. Why can't people like us be happy doing what we love and just push back on the world that says you have to make money?
I think your friends have to tell you that you don't have to, that that's just one measure of how you might say something is successful. And there are many other measures. You know, Mel, you're an incredibly successful person from so much of the hard work that, you know, many people who watch the show know about. I'll let you talk about it. I won't talk about it, but from earlier, lots of hard work. We have happier, healthier lives and better dental situations because of your work, right?
Okay, but Craig, okay, you know, the show is about you.
No, but the reason why I say it is just to answer your question. I think some people might say that. And in the back of your mind, many successful people will say, well, you know, okay, this is great and it's gotten to here, but it's not this or it's not that. There's always a but. But I think part of what, you know, the extended group, friends, people who support you, they help you understand just how much should you be listening to that inner voice of the but. And sometimes, you know, it's good to have that because it helps keep you centered and modest and all that sort of stuff. It's not bad, but it's all a question of perspective and proportion, right? And I think that's why you know, people who know you and people who support you will say, well, you know, I'm not sure that's the measurement you should be looking at.
Okay, I just had to tell my wife that I'm here. This is one of the things of having a television, you know, at home. You know, I have a nice shirt on. This is a nice shirt from Manhattan. But,
you know, it's true that on the rooftops of London during the Blitz, you did not hear Edward R. Murrow getting, you know, come on, dinner's cold.
Exactly.
The bombers are over St. Paul's. Cascades of fire bombs from Hitler's bombers are draining down on London. But I gotta go. Dinner's getting cold.
Exactly. So I have two questions to ask you. I guess the first question, I'm going to have to remember what I wanted to ask you. You tell me what I wanted to ask you, Craig. What haven't I asked you yet? I have two questions.
I'll let you
about the Beatles.
Okay. Big fan.
Okay.
First time caller. Big fan.
Okay. Why?
Great music. Love the backbeat. And, you know, look, I gotta say, have you read Keith Richards' autobiography?
No, I should.
It's a great pleasure. First of all, it's extraordinarily well written, and what an incredible story. And the reason why I bring it up in the context of the Beatles is the early chapters of him and Mick Jagger coming together, you know, neighbors, and those guys from Liverpool. It actually is really hilarious how the trajectory of the Stones and the trajectory of the Beatles in those very early days. What I love about the Beatles stories and about the Stones stories is that, you know, it's very relevant to what we're talking about, Mel. They were so influenced by the development of rock and roll music and blues music and what was happening in the United States. And because of, in some ways, the freedom of doing it in the UK of the late 50s and early 60s, you know, their whole revelation coming to the US, seeing the US's, you know, incredible problems that still existed on their early tour, segregation and all that stuff. I mean, it's really interesting. And so I love the whole, having lived in the UK a long time, I love the whole Liverpool, London thing. And, you know, you just gotta love the Beatles. You just gotta love the Beatles story.
Do you have a particular song that you love?
You know, I got to tell you, I'm an early Beatles fan. This is a little bit before my time, but I'm the early discs, all of that backbeat stuff, the stuff that made them the Shea Stadium, you know, concert list.
And what's wrong with that?
Well, you know, I think
every time I see them on Ed Sullivan, I get goosebumps. Well, and I saw them on Ed Sullivan, right? It's
Well,
been a few years.
but it's a funny thing. This is a little unfair because then you read back in history, like there's so much, oh, we could talk for hours about this. So another great book is, I won't remember the author. It was a great biography of Louis Armstrong that came out a couple of years ago. And we forget the extent to which Louis Armstrong was a transcendent media figure. He was Lady Gaga and Michael Jackson and Frederick Douglass in a way. And he became very controversial because, in the African American community, he was thought as, maybe having sold out, and, he faced tremendous problems with segregation as he toured around the country. But he was a guy on radio and on television, Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, and the book begins, must have been the late 50s. Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic invites Louis Armstrong to appear as a soloist with the entire New York Philharmonic. It might have been in Central Park, or it might have been out in Queens where he lived. Mm-hmm. And it's a colossal event. Thousands of people, free concert. And Louis Armstrong, who, huge global figure, right, talks about how meaningful it was to him to be able to play with Leonard Bernstein in the New York Philharmonic as the soloist. And it's very moving, right? Because, he's a self-taught musician. There's no Harvard in Louis Armstrong's career. There's no Royal Academy of Music. And, these people showed what global culture, how truly global culture could be. I don't know if those were the two questions, but I'm worried dinner's getting cold.
I know the two questions. So do you have a favorite Beatles song?
The first one that comes to mind is, there's a bunch of them, but the first one that comes to mind is I Want to Hold Your Hand.
I knew it. I have it written down here.
Do you have a two of spades as well? Are we going to do the card?
No, that's my friend Lior Manor. I knew it. The moment you
really?
said backbeat. Yeah. I'll tell you why. Because that is the song. That's their first hit in the States.
Yeah. And
that they opened the Ed Sullivan and like when you were talking about it, I was getting goosebumps just from thinking about it.
There are moments like that, right? There are moments in global culture, and I think, it's an interesting question. I was thinking about this. Not just in the context of the walk-on music, which I think you're very funny, because I do think people remember, but maybe they remember it from the movie and not from listening to the You've Got Mail guy, right? Because that's now a decade ago. But
Craig, I'll tell you a secret. The jingle, well, you call it walk-on music. I like that. And the reason I call it a jingle is because it's from radio. I had like a university radio show 10 years ago when there was a chance that people would still understand You've Got Mail. And now that I've reinstated it, only us guys, you say, oh, yeah, I get it.
But there are sounds, and Mel, you're such, people who don't watch the show, they don't know what a gifted musician you are, right? But I have been able to see at 2:00 in the morning the stylings on both keyboard and vocal of Mel Rosenberg, right? So I know that. And somehow or another, there's something in music that is a key for memory. Just like, I don't want to get all intellectual, but just like Proust wrote about the Madeleines and how smelling something can bring back a series of memories, music can do that too. And I think that's part of it. And so for the Beatles, I think if you're an American of a certain time, maybe it is I Want to Hold Your Hand, because that's the one that went everything bananas. It's like Michael Jackson and Thriller.
The thing about that song, there's such an innocence about it, I want to hold your hand. Please let me hold your hand. That's all, I'll go to heaven right afterwards. Let me hold your hand. In the White Album, like 4 or 5 years later, they're singing, Why Don't We Do It in the Road?
Yeah, the world had moved on, right?
They sure had. So two brief questions for you before we get you to sing. The first question is, so kids don't like learning on the screen. They don't like Zoom teaching. But they don't mind watching TV for 16 hours and playing Minecraft. So isn't there something missing here? Like, if we could make studies as interesting as television programs, kids would love Zoom.
That's very true. You know, I wonder if part of it is in the notion of, and this is I think it's a very important question, the notion of our participation. Even in a game, Minecraft or the like, there's something different about being in the audience and something about being a protagonist in the event. And I think breakthrough transcendent Facebook Live or Zoom events, and we tried to work on this during the days at CNN where I was in New York running the digital operation there. It was prior to ubiquitous broadband and prior to some of these telecommunications tools that have made this more effective. But the idea we had was, with very early teleconferencing, could we have kind of a global press conference, if you will, so that tens of thousands of people could watch on the screen. But at that point, we didn't all have video cameras in our laptops. It was much earlier than this. And of course, don't we, like, timing's everything in the technology business, right? A great idea, 3 years too early is a terrible idea. And the company doesn't work and everyone's unhappy. And then like 3 years later, it's like, well, why didn't I? Well, because you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. You got to, that's part of it, right? It's just, there's a lot of things going on to make these things successful. So that's what I try to do.
Jeff Pulver had Zula, which was just like Slack.
Vonage.
Exactly. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's true. And Jeff is super articulate. And one of the reasons why I love being a venture capitalist is working with the entrepreneurs to help them understand that it's necessary to have a great idea and a great team and, great technology, a great consumer experience, great business model, all that stuff. That's necessary, but that's not sufficient. Like, just having that's like, it's sort of like Stuart's story with Slack. Slack was a tool for a different company. The company didn't work, but Slack did.
Yeah. Amazing.
It is amazing. So anyway, I think we've got to sort out this issue of how to get kids to be really engaged.
Because Craig, you said something that's super important for me, and I'm taking notes here. And here's the thing. Zoom has these breakout rooms. So what you're saying is that the moment you let the kids teach or communicate with each other, and I've been saying this since I started teaching on Zoom, when you have a class of 25 kids and you see them all and they see each other, that mirroring effect works. And then you get them into breakout rooms and you get them to invent things.
I agree. And yet my niece, one of my adored nieces, who's a school teacher and a science teacher in the public schools in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, talks about how big a struggle it is during this pandemic, which continues to rage through the world, but in the United States. So many kids don't have the video going on. And a lot of kids are really in difficult circumstances, right? There's a lot of kids at home sharing a connection. Comcast and others have done some wonderful things. Again, this sort of mix between generosity and the business model. They've been super generous about getting better broadband into cities in America. It's all good, but you realize we still have so much work to do to bring everybody up to the level at which we can do that.
Craig, but I'm going to challenge you then, because everybody has televisions. Everybody has televisions. Like a PBS television for general education, where like in Jewish, in the Cheder, in the old days in Eastern Europe, you would be a 6-year-old studying with a 12-year-old in the same little shack. Also in old America, like in rural America.
Yeah. Well,
so imagine going back with that and having education for 6 to 12 on television, but with all the good stuff that TV know how to do to keep people glued to their seats.
Mel, you've touched on something that's super important, and I think it's a perfect illustration of why this is such an important time. Technology now, as we end this decade, 2020, right? Technology now has brought the tools distributed to the edge of our distributed computing network, right? Didn't take a lot for us. I don't mean to diminish the wonder of You've Got Mel as a global programming behemoth, but all we need to do is click on the right HTML link with the right numbers, and we'll be connected. And it's amazing through Facebook Live. Anybody could be joining us. Very scalable. But that takes to the edge, and as we get as we get, broadband out to very rural areas in the developing world, that will largely be a thing that gets complete. The next phase begins to start to re-aggregate that into mass audiences of shared experiences. And right now, your point about Fox and CNN, we're reaching perhaps an apogee of the opposite of that, which is the Tower of Babel. And if I'm remembering my Old Testament correctly, the Tower of Babel story does not end well as the world cascades into a yelling, screaming, shouting match of hundreds, if not thousands, of different languages, no one understanding one another. And what then has to follow is, can you create a more global shared experience in the United States through PBS, in Europe through national or even private broadcasters, in Israel, there's state broadcasting, and there's state supported news and private broadcast. This is different in different regimes. On the other hand, if you don't have the cascade of the Tower of Babel, there's not a cascade of voices in Pyongyang tonight.
Yeah. But you see, Craig, here, I donated 8 of my children's stories to the Israeli Education Ministry to turn into programs to teach English. And they did a terrible job because they're not TV. Imagine if somebody from the television, friends of mine, it would be something I would be proud of. I'm not even sharing it. So anyway, you answered my question about the future. And now, because you want to get on with your day, and I have to give a talk about the Beatles and science. I'm going to ask you what I always ask, which you know already, is would you mind singing?
Yeah, I didn't really know how to answer this, so I didn't prepare anything, Mel. I
want to hold your hand.
Can I go to my go-to singing? It won't be very long, but yes, I'm ready to sing.
Go for it.
Which is a big thing for me because I'm not a singer. So it needs a little bit of a setup. And I did this at a Kindernet once, and Yossi was surprised. So this is a nice way to end this segment of You've Got Mel. So I was very fortunate for a lot of different things, but in college, I was lost in one of our one of the big buildings, and it happened to be the Department of East Asian Studies. And I was a freshman, just wet behind the ears, and nobody. And I was looking at this bulletin board, and there were all these interesting things you could do in the summer. And one of the interesting things you could do in the summer was go to Japan. And just at that moment, the guy who ran the program to send people to Japan came out of his office. He was 6'6", a big guy. And he sort of slapped me on the back. He said, "You should go to Japan. Everybody should go to Japan." So I went to Japan. I had a summer internship at a very, very wonderful company called Matsushita Electric, which had brand names like Panasonic and Technics and others. And I spent the summer at their overseas training center teaching English and learning about Japanese business. And you could say to yourself, like, that seems pretty crazy. I mean, I was interested in global stuff, as we talked about.
This was before Belgium.
This was before Belgium. This was in college. And I came back and I studied Asian languages, and Asia became part of my career. I was the youngest Tokyo bureau chief in the Wall Street Journal's history at the time. I went back to Japan later in my career. Japan's still a big part of my life.
All this because of getting lost in the corridor.
Yep.
Incredible.
So you got to be open to those experiences.
Craig, I need you to write that story up.
So I am going to sing for you this morning in California, this evening in Israel, and as people sleep in Japan, so no one's going to be watching, I would like to sing the Matsushita Company song. This song is the song that people at the Matsushita Company sing before they do their company exercises every day, as a reminder of founder Konosuke Matsushita's contribution to Japanese capitalism, which was a never-ending supply of consumer electronics for the benefit of mankind. And he and Matsushita have done their part. Akarui kokoro, ahueru inoshi, yutamani musu, Matsushita denki.
That's it?
There are other verses. But as you go on, you recognize that while there are many company principles, all of them are first. Because
so Craig, I've interviewed now almost 100 people. This is a first.
The shortest song?
Yeah, if I ever put together like the best of You've Got Mel, that's going to be right in there.
Thank you.
It also can fit anywhere between segments, you know.
There you go. Look,
You need a 17-second filler.
look, that's a good producer. Look, you're doing television. Just make it short. Can you make it shorter? Can you just make it shorter?
It's been remarkable. I want to go on and give you a great big Kindernet hug, and take care of yourself. And I want to interview your niece, who's a teacher.
I will introduce you to her. Very happy to
Because
introduce
I
you
think
to her.
these are the frontline people together with the healthcare.
Lindsay is doing a fantastic job in difficult circumstances. She's teaching science and technology actually to 8th and 9th graders in the Pittsburgh public school system, and it's a challenging time.
I'll be delighted to interview her. And listen, you know, you're too young to be a danger to the virus, but please take care of yourselves.
Same to you.
Keep doing wonderful stuff.
Well, and the same, Mel. This is terrific. I'm very flattered to be on your show, and let me know how.
Kidding? I'm so totally honored that you spent time with me.
Listen, dinner's getting cold. Happy holidays.
You too, my friend.
Okay, bye.
Bye.